Good evening, Dan. So I'm a financial advisor. I'm obliged to put a disclaimer up that this is not financial advice. And please don't ask for financial advice in the Q&A. But before I get into it, a big thank you to the organizers tonight, to Nicole and Vitalina, for inviting me and having me here. But more importantly, for conferring on me official nerd status. Now, when I was first asked, I wasn't quite sure how to take this, because when I was growing up, it definitely wasn't cool to be a nerd. Now, I know over time things have evolved, and now it's something to be more revered than ridiculed. Well, this is what Google led me to believe anyway, until I decided to look at the official dictionaries. In particular, the Cambridge Dictionary, which gives us this definition. I kid you not, go and look it up. So a nerd is a person, especially a man, who is not attractive and is awkward or socially embarrassing. Oh, that's my brother right there. Now, the truth of that really stung because of how accurately it described me. So, feeling a bit deflated, I then felt quite a sense of hope when it goes on to help explain this definition a bit further, because these are my wife's sentiments exactly. He was a real nerd in high school. I can't believe he's so handsome now. Those are not my words. You can literally go and look it up. So, now that we've established what qualifies me to speak tonight, because I'm certainly not a professor and anywhere near as clever as any of the other speakers here tonight, or that you've probably had before. So let's get into it. Tonight, what I'd like to chat about or help us understand is a paradigm shift in how we perceive value and how we think about money and how we behave with money. Now, I'm sure you'll recognize what that is, the New Zealand $20 bill. If you haven't picked this up already, by my accent, I'm originally from South Africa. Now, if you're wondering if I'm black because of my color, then you're right. But then if you're thinking, well, not quite sure, and you're wondering if I'm white, you're also right. So everybody's a winner tonight. Well done. Okay, so my first trip to New Zealand was in 2014 to have a look at this wonderful country. And on my last night, before I went home, I was taken out for a night on the town by my other brother that's also here tonight. That meant going to the Container Mall and then a high-stakes game of poker at the Christchurch Casino. Now, high stakes for me was $20. And I was actually gifted the $20, so it wasn't mine. So if I went, tried out the poker games, and by the end of the night, I was lucky enough to walk away with one of these, a $100 bill. This was the first and last time I would possess one of these. Okay, let's have a bit of participation. Can you put up your hand if in the last 12 months you've held one of these bills? Oh my word. So that is very few people, but surprisingly more than I thought. Okay, next question. If in the last week you have either received or spent $100, that's going to be some of you here tonight, can you put up your hands? There we go. So what's my point in this? Currently in New Zealand, less than 4% of all financial transactions are actually happening with this stuff, cash. Money has become a bunch of digits that floats around in the cloud. It's becoming less and less tangible over time and more difficult for us to understand it, especially our children. So previously, cash was linked to the gold standard. Who remembers those days? Right? You could actually go to the Reserve Bank and they'd give you the equivalent in gold. When that all changed, the Reserve Bank could willy-nilly print as much as they like. Exactly why and how, who knows. Interestingly, since last year, for the first time, they're minting less and less coins. In fact, in the last 3 or 4 years, they've minted hardly any. So, what does the future of money look like? Are we heading towards a cashless society? Will we have a digital currency? Will Bitcoin be the new gold standard? I'm sure some of us here have bought some Bitcoin. Anyone? Yep, you're probably quite happy right now. Bitcoin has reached some record highs, which is completely coincidental and long before I prepared this talk and has nothing to do with this talk really. Or will we go back to trading and bartering for goods and services? I can't answer any of these questions, and that's not what I'm going to talk about necessarily. But what I'm fascinated about is this link with money and wealth, because up until this point, money is still the best mechanism to measure wealth for exchanges of goods and services and a store of wealth. We've all heard the question or the statement that money doesn't buy happiness. But who would agree that without any money, you're quite unhappy? So is there a certain amount of money that actually gives us the optimal amount of happiness? And in fact, there's a study that you can see up there in 2010 by 2 Nobel Prize winners, Deaton and Kahneman, and they came across the magic number. So that magic number was 75,000 US dollars, or at that point, 125,000 New Zealand dollars. Since then, lots of studies have been done. In New Zealand, studies have been done, and it's around $100,000. So what does this mean? If you look at the graph, you'll notice that under $20,000, people are pretty unhappy. So this is an annual salary of $20,000. There's a really steep curve that starts to happen. So an increase in the happiness quotient from 20,000 to 75. And from there, it kind of doesn't increase as rapidly anymore. So from 75,000 US, or around 125,000 New Zealand dollars, there's actually diminished returns in terms of happiness, which is quite interesting. So we kind of peak out at that point. Now, granted, the definition of happiness that they would have used was quite limited and defined to certain parameters. And we know that it's wider than that. So over the last 15 years since the study, behavioral economics has developed and evolved. And we now speak more about the concept of financial wellness. So how well are we financially? What does our financial life look like? We speak about financial independence and freedom and these types of concepts. What I'm more interested in is kind of turning that around. So as opposed to applying the concept of wellness to money or finance, can we apply the concept of finance to wellness? Is there a way to measure the impact of our wellness in monetary terms? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about when money became important to me. As a child, I had little to no understanding of money. But picture this, I'm 14 years old, I'm about to head out the door to school, and my father's sat at the kitchen table with books and pens. So I come over, hey Dad, what are you doing? And he's busy going through our personal accounts, which was interesting to me at that point. So he jokingly laments the fact that up until that point, my brothers and I had cost him $1 million. And if it wasn't for us, he would have been a millionaire. So that stopped me dead in my tracks, and it was an amazing moment, because in that moment, I'd had the conversation with the poorest man that I'd ever meet. But straight afterwards, I had the conversation with the wealthiest man that I've ever met, which is me. Because I vowed 3 things that night. 1, I would become financially independent of my parents as quickly as possible. 2, if I ever had kids, they'd be an asset in the balance sheet, not a liability. And 3, I would never rely on anyone or anything for money. Now, I've been fortunate that by the age of 18, I was pretty much financially independent. I've been able to run a business, which has not been easy by any means, but it's allowed flexibility and freedom. But most importantly, together with my beautiful wife, we have 4 amazing kids, which have granted us huge amounts of reward and quite difficult to quantify. Okay, this is all sounding a bit airy-fairy, and it's not meant to be some motivational, inspirational speech. So what I'm going to get onto now, that we're starting to understand a bit about money and value, is look a bit more at the numbers. So there's been this trend from financial literacy, which is knowledge-based, how much do we know about finance, to the concept of financial wellness. How do we apply that knowledge? So we've gone from net worth, what does the balance sheet look like, to this concept of net wealth, which is far broader than that. To what extent are you living your best life financially? So I would like to propose a case study. This is not going to be intense mathematical numbers, and there are a bunch of variables that are missing on purpose. So we have a 35-year-old. Any of those here tonight? Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm not speaking to you specifically. This is quite generalized. Who earns $100,000 per year, works 40 hours a week and 50 weeks of the year, so we've given them a 2-week holiday, and therefore earns $50 an hour. Okay, we're excluding tax and other factors. There's 3 things that I want to speak about. Now, there's a whole bunch of factors that I could speak about tonight and I could use in these calculations, but I'm going to limit it to 3 because they're based on my life, and I'm probably going to get more and more in trouble as I go along with these 3. So, the first one is time. I want you to have a think about how much time do you waste? So, in an average day, average week, month, or year, how much time do you waste? Okay, now I'm not going to get all hardcore about this, David Goggins type style, if you know who that is. I'm not going to get into self-flagellation or anything like that. But if you just think about how much time do you waste? What if you could somehow find 2 hours a week? Okay, so that's only 30 minutes a day. So we thought about this proactively. You find 2 hours a week and you finally got into that side hustle, or somehow you were able to generate income in those 2 hours. That would add $100 a week. Okay, remember our case study, $50 an hour. We've now got $100 a week. You invest that at 10%. Let's assume that's an average linear growth for 30 years, which takes you to age 65. Your end balance is $980,000. Okay, so just under $1 million because you found 2 hours a week. Now, talking about wasting time, let's talk about this one. Anybody got one of these? Nope. Okay, I'm not going to talk about social media, so relax, because then I'd be straight out the door. If you have a look at the picture, that probably looks like some sort of share trading graph. It's not. That's a screenshot on my phone of my profile on chess.com. Any chess players here tonight? 1, 2, yep, okay. If you don't want to put your hand up, that's fine. But can we please meet afterwards? I've only got one friend on there, and I'd like to play some other people. So anyway, this is what I do. This is what I do to waste some time. And in the last 12 months, I've played 3,762 games. How? Well, they last 1.6 minutes on average. I don't have time to sit there for hours, so I play what's called bullet chess, and you have 1 minute each. That's a total of 100 hours in the last 12 months, which means it actually cost me $5,000 to play. Investing that the same way, my end balance would be $860,000 by the time I'm 65. Okay, now hopefully I don't get kicked out for this next one, but it's the one that's been the biggest challenge for me and still is, because there's a lot of growth that needs to happen in this area. Physical health. Now there's a 2014 study that shows the relationship between BMI and cause-specific mortality. Extreme obesity can shorten a lifespan by 14 years. Okay, so this study, once again, very confined, limited parameters. There's lots of aspects to our physical health, so that's not the track I'm going down. But there's very little financial evidence out there or evidence that shows us how our lifespan can increase. So what if we just used 5 years? So if I took a proactive approach, so I start going to the gym, look after my diet a bit better, and that meant an extra 5 years, because that's minimum what it would mean for my life. And we do the same calculations in terms of what the time looks like. That gives you an end balance of $2.8 million. What have we just uncovered? So if we bring it all together, that's a total of $4.7 million. So $5 million have been added by the time you're 65 years old. Now, we haven't taken inflation into account, obviously, because $5 million in 30 years' time is not going to buy you what it will today. So if we look at the present value of $5 million, in other words, what are the opportunity costs of me not making these changes? It's just over $1 million. So I'm sitting on $1 million right now, dependent on my choices. And here's the sting. So the sting in the tail is that the reverse is also true. Now, I don't have time to go into the power of compounding interest, but Einstein said it's the eighth wonder of the world. It either works for you or against you. So the choice is ours. Do we make use of the time, our energy, our resources, and uncover the millions that are actually sitting right in front of us? That's me. Thank you.
Anyone want to ask a question? Anyone in the back?
For the amount of things that you say we are going to make money off of working extra hours, at what time in our life are we going to spend that money if we never relax to actually live to that time?
I was 100% expecting that to be the first question. And I tried to, when I started off, say that I wasn't heading down that road. But you make a very good point, and that's a good question. So I'm not advocating at all that we don't rest, which is why I didn't put Netflix up there either. Like, we need to watch Netflix. We need to scroll on the phone. A part of that is cathartic. It's helpful. Look, maybe you're getting tons of dopamine hits all the time, but those things are definitely necessary. And I could do this the other way. So I could look at something like travel or a holiday in terms of what that would cost you, but what the return on investment could be. So if you, for example, heading towards burnout, the best thing you can do is take a break and go on holiday. And that would add years to your lifespan, which would then create potentially millions for you. So I think the point is to become a little bit more aware of the value of things outside of just the work we do to generate an income. But that was a great question.
I think I work with your brother, by the way. Yeah, shout to Garth.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
We'll talk about it after. My question to you is, do you think that the modes of money that you've described in terms of the shift do you think that is having a negative impact on people's financial literacy or ability to understand their own finances over time?
100%. And I think that this is why it's so critical at this point. We're starting to see more and more financial anxiety starting to pop up. And it's not necessarily related to money itself, to what people earn, but it's becoming more and more difficult to actually grasp concepts around money. Our industry does a really good job of overcomplicating money. It's not that complicated, but it does seem to be concentrated more in the hands of the few than the many. And the more instability that we have, and especially since COVID, and the uncertainty of the future, makes these things even worse. So especially for the generation coming through and for our kids, we do a lot to help them understand the value of money, that it's not just something that magically appears. The average kid now thinks that if you've got one of these, you've got money, because it magically just taps. So yes, the advance in technology is great, but it can have its drawbacks.
Thanks for that. You've used 10% as your example there of an investment, but obviously investments vary by returns, and the riskier the investment, the higher return you garner from it. So given its effects on over the time of life, does that sort of imply that we should be taking more investment risks and making more financial risks, because at the end of that lifespan it will make a very marked difference?
Yeah, 100%. So if I have your question correctly, you're talking about how we apply risk to investment specifically. So I'll give a general answer. Each person needs to obviously understand their own risk in terms of their appetite for risk, their capacity for risk, and those types of things. But at 10%, that's probably the average that the market returns in every 10 or 15-year rolling period, like the S&P 500, for example. So over a 30-year period, it's probably a conservative way to look at it. Definitely, generally, with that sort of time frame, you'd want to apply more risk for higher reward.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.